Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Caruso. I'm the co-founder of a company called KnowledgeNet.ai, but really on the stage with me today is Christophe Ngo, the CEO and founder of Code Engine Studio. Christophe, you want to give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, it'd be a pleasure to. Thanks all for having me today, Nick. It's a pleasure to be on and just get a chance to be here and chat today. So yeah, a bit of my background. So I've been in the development space since around 2002. It's been a little while here. I started development kind of at a larger multinational, work on Fortune type 50 type clients. So the likes of Mercedes-Benz, Gucci, Labatt's, those types of clients. Did that for a little over a decade, and then in 2013, 2014, I moved to Vietnam and started Code Engine Studio, where we've been working with clients globally in about 20 plus countries from our office, head office in Vietnam. Now with clients globally, around 20 plus countries, with Vietnam being where we do most of our work, but most of our clients are ultimately based in the United States.
That's terrific, Christophe. And I know for myself, I've actually worked with outsourced companies out of Vietnam now for about 10 plus years myself. Vietnam has actually really focused on STEM from an educational perspective. So the talent pool is pretty incredible in Vietnam today. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail right on the head with that. So for Southeast Asia, Vietnam has got just an amazing education system. Vietnam has really prioritized education for a long time. I think sometimes people are a little surprised coming here with they might have envisioned post-war that it would be something that's pretty backwater, but they've advanced tremendously with a huge focus on education. So based on standardized testing, they do exceptionally well. They rival even some of the scores in mathematics and sciences to North America, US and Canada. So they've done a great job with their education system. And that has given us an opportunity for some amazing engineers who really have just a huge work ethic. So it's been a great basis for a great talent pool.
No, I can certainly attest to that myself with my own experience. So for the people who are listening in, this isn't necessarily a hard sales pitch on Code Engine. This is really, the title of this webinar is From Idea to Execution, How Strategic Outsourcing Accelerates Startup Growth. So no matter who you decide, your outsourcing partner, certainly Code Engine is one of those very well qualified partners. Christophe has been working with some Fortune 50 companies for over 10 years now. But this is really an educational experience. I come from myself a long line of startups, and I found outsourcing to really be a great pair to my in-house development team. And so that's why we put together this webinar series, is to share that, because when I first started my first startup, I was like, I don't know if I want to outsource. I just want to keep, just US developers. But it was really fantastic to have that augmented team overseas as well. All right, so I'm just going to show, kind of like to put punctuate the point. Thierry, can you actually go to that second slide that says problem statement? Thierry's our director in the background. He's going to pull up a slide here. And Christophe, can you just speak to this slide? I think it's a good intro into what we're talking about.
Yeah, so I think there's a reality, kind of what you were talking about. While teams often in North America and the States would really prefer to work just locally, but there is challenges that can present. There's a reality of costs that are associated to that, as well as limited access to local talent. And so there's remote work helps in that, whether that's in country, but then as you go further out, you're really accessing a greater talent pool. But with that comes the situation where a lot of these projects, even according to Statista, that 50% of the outsourced projects all over the world have a good chance of failure. And so I think that, and it's not only because it's outsourcing, it's just remote projects, and projects as a whole in the software space are incredibly challenging. And so there's that balance of needing to utilize your budgets efficiently and get the most for your project that you can, but being able to do it in such a way that you're limiting that risk. You can never get rid of it, but I think there are huge ways where you find the right team then you're able to minimize that and certainly shrink it down from 50-50 chance of a coin flip of whether you're going to succeed or not.
Yep. So certainly, any projects, there's risk associated with it. But if you're considering outsourcing, we're very well aware of the risks, right? That's why we're having this meeting today, is to clarify that and bring some perspective to our audience as to what to look out for. So Christophe, a lot of startups struggle to balance the speed and cost in that early growth stage, right? So you really want to get up and going really quickly. You want to control your costs. But can you share some examples of outsourcing that helped a startup overcome one of these challenges?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, is it possible to bring up that next slide, the one with the this one? I think this kind of speaks to it, and then after I can give you an example. I think where it really starts out is when you're looking for an outsourcing partner. I think people are really not sometimes missing on alignment. So this you might not be familiar, but this has been a pretty common comic strip, and it kind of walks through different ideas of what's being sold. And so when you have the sales team at the top left, that's give an example of when someone's working with an outsourcing team, they're like, this is what they're selling them. They're like, I want to swing, and so they give them this idea that they're going to do a triple decker swing. And then, all throughout, it gives examples of different perspective, how the engineering team sees it, how the design team sees it, how they're portraying it to the client, and how the features are really being built and what's being described. And it's kind of just all together, just showing different versions of it. The second last one is a stump. And that's kind of the example where it's saying, this is actually what was truly delivered to the client. And all along, the last one is what the client just needed, was a wheel attached to the tree as a swing. And I think this kind of speaks to that idea of like the challenges of managing cost and expectations. And so what I think happens is it's about understanding each other. And so when you're looking for a sales partner, sometimes what you really got to look for the people who don't just talk a big game, or who don't like show something, but actually have demonstrated how they can deliver on it, and who are thoughtful. And so a lot of times you'll see it's like, as a startup, you'll be very budget conscious, so you'll just be looking at cost. But I think that leaves a lot of space for ultimately failure of your project. Kind of like that previous slide we talked about, where 50% of those projects fail. It's because you have misalignment. You're not getting a team that really understands what it is that you want. You're just saying, yeah, we'll do it at the cheapest price, but ultimately that just leaves so much room for miscommunication and then misunderstandings. And they're really not the right partner for you. So you're just having a missing partnership. They're just there to get the job done, versus really understanding you and being thoughtful. And so I think that's that fine balance that people need, especially when you're thinking about using your budget well. It's being able to find the right partner who understands you. And so some examples we have of that is, we had this one client called Clickvoyant, and we've worked with them for over 5 years. So it's around, I believe, 6 years we've done work with them. And they're a MarTech solution. What they do is they do data aggregation using AI to then give data insights. And so what they had been trying to do at the beginning, the founder was trying to get this going. They had tried to get other teammates who would do a trade of equity for development, but it just kept on dawdling on because no one was ever fully committed. And as well, even when people were spending time on it, it was kind of a secondary job, so they never did a great effort and they never really fully committed. And then so they'd been spending, I think it was almost 18 months just dawdling on, and even when they were spending cash, it was just very inefficient. And so by the time they decided, hey, let's really commit and let's make sure we get a team that understands, who really brings a lot more to the table other than just some delivery expectations of like getting work done, but also being able to really think and help us to strategize. When we started working with them, we were able to go from taking the bits that they did have over to a full working MVP in about 6 months' time. So it was just night and day, from 18 to 6 months, from pretty much nothing that was really usable to actually being able to go client ready as your starting MVP. So I think that was a huge success for them.
So Christophe, on that example that you gave, I always think it's really important when you're working with an outsourced team that they truly become part of the team of the company. That they're not just a body shop, they're not just writing a few functions or something like that. Can you just go into detail on that? Like, did you feel that your team was part of the team for them?
Oh, definitely. And that's, I think, one of the big distinguishing factors. I think that sets a team, whether that's ours or any other one that you might be partnering with, apart. How can you make them part of your team versus just being a vendor? And that's certainly never the way we see ourselves, where it's just like kind of a black box. You just throw something over the fence and it just suddenly magically comes back. People, that's a great idea, but seldom succeeds. It generally just almost always fails because it just isn't the reality. And I think people are a little bit more aware of that, even now with being more comfortable to some degree with remote work. They recognize you need context. You need people who are thoughtful. You need people who are partnering with you. And that's the way we view ourselves as partners, and that are here not just to get what we can get, but how can we make sure you're successful? And that's what we believe. Ultimately, if we're giving you everything that we can for your success, it's going to win. When you're winning as a client, then we're going to be winning as your partner. And that's the way we view things.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's really important. One of the mistakes I made when I first worked with outsourced teams is that was more like just a body shop, right? And then I clearly realized really quickly, no, the context is so important. And if you're familiar with software development, for people listening, when software developers get requirements now, usually there's the user story that goes with it. Like, what's the story that to fulfill a person clicking on that button, right? But I think it goes to, I know for myself, we include our outsourced development team when we're doing hey, team calls. Like, hey, great job this week, or hey, we made our number, or we made this goal, or to really feel that they're contributing to, because it's a mutual success, right? My success is the team's success, right? So I'm sure you've had that same experience, Christophe.
Yeah, for sure. I think those are when we're working with a client who really sees us as an extension of their team, it really just helps everyone feel like they're on the same bus, really headed towards the same goal versus feeling like, oh, we're outsiders. And everybody wins in that case. I don't see when there's ever a negative to that effect of being part of a partnership, because then you just get buy-in. And that's what you really want. You want people who are fully committed. And so when you're sharing those things, your regular weekly interval calls or daily even, it just helps everyone know we're in this battle together. We're here for each other's backs.
So let's talk about some strategic advantages. So if you're going from C to Series or Series C in that critical phase of your startup, what are some of those critical advantages to looking at outsourcing?
Yeah, I think that depending on where you are in your development process and in your startup, whether you're kind of just at that seed stage or bootstrapping it to eventually getting money, it kind of indicates where you are in a life cycle and what you need. And so I think it might change a little bit along the way. So some examples would be when we come in fairly early, maybe you have a startup where they don't even yet have a CTO. They've got the idea, they've got a budget, they've got buy-in from some form of partners who have invested, maybe a little bit smaller, some angels, but they don't have a CTO. So what's great is that because of not only myself, but our leadership team, many of us have 20 plus years of experience in industry. We really can help play that fractional CTO role that helps you get off the ground. And so one of the big differences of our company is that you're not just getting, like the way you put it, like a body shop where you're just hiring individual bodies. What you're really getting is people who understand software development and product development at that. And so when we come to the table, we're bringing the expertise to understand, well, not just, hey, we can do what you're asking us to do, but we're going to come asking you, well, have you thought about these things? Have you thought about what is the true best MVP? Have you considered the fact that you might not have done sufficient research with your users? And have you done all this like prototyping that's necessary to make sure you're not going too far before you're building, the full kitchen sink for your MVP? So there's a lot more that can be brought. And so when we start with a smaller company, we can play that role of almost CTO, strategists, and be a lot more partners. We can certainly do that as you get further along, but if you've already gotten to your A, B, or certainly C rounds, you probably already have that. And so in those cases, what we'll often do is we'll just come along. We might help do some audits. Sometimes we'll come in. We will look at the technology. Since we're certified in GCP, AWS, then we can come in and we can say, hey, you might have overlooked optimization in certain spaces. And so we'll help as deep technologists, or when you're just looking to move a little faster than your own current team can. Or maybe you want to focus your team on new feature development and you want to be able to not lag getting that support your customers need, and you need another team that's able to focus on another area that you couldn't otherwise, such as client support. So we all range on both ends, highly strategic all the way to just helping you advance and get a lot faster.
No, that's a great point. And there's also a lot of great savings that you can probably bring to companies that they're not aware of. Like, a lot of startups aren't aware of some of the great free programs that are being provided by Google Cloud or AWS or things like that, right?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, depending on when they're building a product, there's the huge benefits that you can have by building it on one of those cloud platforms. They'll give you huge discounts. They'll give you tons of free credits. We can support any partner who's looking to build a product that can save them thousands, even hundreds of thousands at times, depending on what they're looking at. And if they're using, say, an AI product, there's huge benefits. They're really trying to entice people to different platforms. So
right. Yeah, and I'm aware, personally, I took advantage of AWS's $50,000 in free credits, having been backed by a VC company in the past. And if you're not aware of it, you don't know how to take advantage of that. But at the same point, you also really want to work with an expert that says you don't want to get locked in to a product that's going to be really expensive, because that's what AWS wants you to do, right? So it's that expertise.
Yeah, for sure.
So, a common misconception about outsourcing, though, is that it's just a cost-cutting measure. Can you provide how this actually drives innovation and growth for startups beyond just maybe saving a little bit of money?
For sure. I mean, I think there's got to be a cost benefit in most cases, especially if you're going to be looking at hiring an entire team out of offshore, and there's some truth to that. But if that's your only motivation, again, we're going to get back to that situation where you might be finding yourself with a team that's misaligned with what you're looking for, where you're just looking at cost versus how are they adding true value. And so that's kind of getting to your point. I think when you find the right team, they're going to add a lot more value than just getting work done, and hopefully not getting work done poorly, as a lot of outsourcing situations can be when you find the wrong team. So when you find the right team, they'll understand a lot about your vertical usually, and if they might not be experts in that specific vertical, they really understand how to build the product and how to be strategic about building the right pieces. And so they're going to bring ideas to the table, like you said, maybe ideas around how can you optimize and use the right hosting provider or infrastructure like AWS or GCP, and then save tons of money. They'll almost pay for themselves. Like if you didn't know you could save $50,000 to $100,000, that alone could have already saved more than the cost of the outsourcing partner alone, let alone all the other things that they can bring. The way I like to imagine it is when you hire a marketing team, you don't think of them as just a cost saving function. No, you hired that marketing team because they had expertise. They know how to best market your product to the right audience, and they've got expertise. They can demonstrate, and you know that you're not an expert marketer. And in the same way, when you're building a product, most startups don't have a ton of history building products. Well, we've built hundreds of products, so we really do understand how can you do it efficiently. How can and we help try to push back, because they really need to understand how can they optimize their spend to get the most out of it and test it, versus trying to overspend at the beginning before it's truly validated. So when you're working with a team like ours, you're not just hiring bodies to get the work done. You're getting a team that understands building software.
So, and I think that you touched on this. This is really key. When you have a startup, it's all about getting your MVP out as soon as possible and then iterating off of that. So that really talks about speed to market. Can you talk about that? How outsourcing really helps with speed to market?
Yeah, for sure. So like speed to market, it is a huge advantage for sure. But sometimes we don't want to overvaluate speed to market. In other words, you don't just want to throw anything out there. So it's just understanding what's the right fit to your audience. But certainly, really, like, there's different ways to increase your speed. One is going to be by not having to hire people yourself. You're going to reduce your hiring times and just operational delays. So you already have a team that's fully ready. You're also going to just have access to more talent than you might locally. So that'll speed up that aspect, because if you're trying to find one person who's like, oh, I'm looking for the guy who's got a ton of Kubernetes experience as I'm setting up the infrastructure, are you going to find that guy quickly? It's probably going to take you a lot of time, and you might not even have that talent nearby. But on top of it is the fact that that cost for that talent domestically might cost you a fortune. So by lowering your costs, now you can potentially look at increasing your team size. And by having an increased optimal team size, you could also be speeding yourself up. So that opportunity to take advantage of that speed to market and iterating quicker is benefited by lowering your cost to the size and also access to greater talent pools. So I think that is a huge advantage. But again, I think it's like speed to market with the poor product is worse than, trying to match those things up. Speed to market with the right team, with the right product, and the right people that can support you really is that beautiful balance between all the different parts.
Right. No, I totally agree with you. I don't know if there's industry specifics on when you should get your MVP out, and I'm using that term for the audience. It's minimally viable product, and you never want to wait for perfection, because you'll never get your product out, right? But I think where an outsourced partner is really critical, because they can really help guide you and say, wait a minute, you're trying to accomplish too much, right? Let's pare this down. What is truly the minimal thing to get feedback from your users? And I think that's like an outsourced partnership is really critical. Not a body shop, as we've really been drumming. This is really that partnership, and that's really important to understand. So let's talk about scaling, though. Let's say you do have your MVP and you want to scale now. Can you talk about how you've been able to help companies scale and be successful from there?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I can even give some specific examples. So a client that we've been working with now for about 2-3 years, they're called WWG, Worldwide Generation, and they're based out of London. And so what they do is they focus on sustainability measurements, so SDG measurement tool. So they already had an existing team in the UK, but they were looking to expand, and so they were focused on Singapore, and they needed a partner in the region. So what they were looking to do was expand their team, and so by working with us, not only did they get the advantage of location for them in that case, it being around Singapore, but also a team that had a lot of expertise in the area that they were looking for in development. But by hiring our team, we brought in another 5 people that was development, but also in quality assurance to help support their team. We also did some product ownership support and Scrum Master development from our side. So we had a Scrum Master help them to work with some of those stories and different pieces to make sure that we were using their budgets optimally in the right spaces. And so by doing that, we were able to really help them deliver within a tighter time commitment that they had to their team and to their partners in Singapore as well. So I think that's an example where by working with a team, you could hire a team at a fraction of the cost, but also the right team that allowed you to get a lot faster delivery for what you needed.
No, that's great. And sort of related to this, as I've worked with outsourced companies, one thing I've implemented, which was interesting, is pairing a onshore developer with offshore, truly as a team. And it's really been fascinating because it's allowed us to actually have almost 24/7 cycles. So have you worked with projects like that? Because I think it's been a fascinating combination of truly collaborative work. Anything you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we definitely have worked on teams. So like I said, that example was a team out of London, but we've worked with teams that are located in multiple locations. Right now we have a project that's it's a fintech application that's targeted towards the US government. And so with that application, we are working with teams that are in the East Coast, West Coast, as well as India, and our team in Vietnam. So that's one where we have multiple teams going all around different times. And so we meet up all sorts of hours of the day. And so it allows our teams to be efficient altogether. And so we've worked on projects where sometimes that they'll either work together, integrated, or sometimes we might take a part and they'll take a different part and then we'll then tie it all together. So there's lots of different ways to do that. But it can be a huge benefit once you get everything smoothly running, where then you can have almost around the clock development, especially when you're looking to deliver as quickly as possible. And once you have a nice CI/CD process and you really get that whole Scrum development practice being utilized by all the teams, it can be incredibly efficient.
Great. So now we talked about the benefits of outsourcing. Like if you think, okay, well, maybe I really am interested. What should a company or a CEO be looking at in an outsourced partner?
Certainly. I mean, I think going back to that idea of those misalignments, I think you really need to be looking at that. So I think finances, we understand budgets are real and you need to be considering those. But I think that needs to be somewhat secondary when you're selecting your partner. Yes, does the partner have to fit with your budget? Yes, for sure. But if that's the only metric, then you're setting your chance up for that 50% failure rate. But I think if what you're looking for is a partner, and when you're looking for a partner, it's just like, hey, if you wanted to hire somebody in your own company, you usually want to hire somebody who, first and foremost, aligns to your values. Do they like working together? Like it's one of those ideas where like, hey, would I want to go to beer with this guy if I had to, right? If you really don't want to actually spend any time with this person because they just don't match your values, they just aren't an interesting person in any formal way, and they just kind of really clash. Those are the types of things I would say. It's kind of all those other skills that it takes to work together. So do they align with your values? Are they able to communicate? Are they actually insightful? And so you can't fake that. You can't fake being insightful. Like you can't be like, you can lie about things or you can maybe exaggerate on things, but when you are forced to really talk about how would you faced with the problem, how would you deal with it, and how would you problem solve? Those are great ways to really understand, like demonstrating past examples as well as how they would problem solve a problem that you or might be facing with right now. And so I think those are the things that we tend to look at. And so, like, as an example, our company, we run an EOS, which is called the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And it really prioritizes alignment of all of its team members towards values and making sure we hire and we compensate, and we like everything. Our reviews are all around values, and I think when you find someone who's a partner who really focuses on values that match yours, you're going to find somebody who really meets what you're looking for.
Yep, and I personally can't stress that enough. It's truly the teamwork aspect of things. I think obviously cost is one of the main reasons that a lot of companies are looking at outsourcing, but that should not be the priority. Yeah, ultimately you're going to save money. I mean, there's no doubt about that. You are going to save money, but there's so many benefits beyond that. One of the key ones for me is, there's high turnover here in the U.S. You may bring on a developer, and you never know. A year from now, they might get a better job offer, right? And I've definitely found a lot more stability working with outsourced organizations, like CodeEngine is a great example, right? So if organizations like CodeEngine provide just tremendous value to the local community and the cities where you're involved in. So let's talk a little bit about that. Cost versus quality. Do you want to go into a little bit more focus on that, Christophe?
Sure. I mean, I think, I don't know if I consider this completely always accurate, because you don't really want to do cost versus quality. You really just need quality. But there is a sense of what is the right quality, because sometimes when you're making an MVP, if you're doing best software practices, it might not be the right time, depending on if it's just purely, hey, this is validation. You might want to look at efficiency. And then afterwards, if this is no longer just validation, we are making sure this is really going to be a solid tool, then you really want to make sure the quality is up there. Because one of the things that people don't like to pay for oftentimes is be like, oh, I don't really want to pay for the unit tests. I don't really want to pay to make sure all these other pieces are tested effectively, because the most important thing is getting client feedback and just getting more and more features. I understand that, but the problem will be if you fail to build with quality in mind. Ultimately, you're going to pay. You just might not be paying right now. You're going to pay later on, right? And there's a statement that I don't know who it comes from, but it's in the software industry. It talks about you don't have enough budget to build it right, but you are always going to have enough budget to build it twice. And so what we really recommend is identifying where are you in the life cycle, what do you need, make sure you're building it as close to right as possible, and versus trying to cut all the corners out. So yes, cost versus quality. I think that you do know where you are in the life cycle to choose what's most important, but quality should rarely be cut out at the expense of for the sake of speed alone. But we also do understand startups do have limited budgets, so there's a fine line to be thought about there.
Yeah, as a serial entrepreneur myself, definitely guilty of not always having unit testing and end-to-end testing automated, and it's always burned me down the road. So but it's that balance, right? You have limited funds. You need to get something out. You need to get validation. You're trying to chase, your Series A after a seed investment. So, but that's part of it. Your outsourced partner needs to understand that balance. And I think that's you really hit that well, Christophe, on that. So when you're talking about, as a startup, there's lots of different areas to outsource. From a software development perspective, can you give some different approaches that, obviously there's a core product if you're a SaaS, but maybe you're not a SaaS company. So Christophe, what are some ideas that can be outsourced?
Sorry, you're saying what are some types of ideas in products that should be or considered to be?
Yeah, exactly. So, which parts of a business from an outsourcing perspective? So there's the core product, right? But I've also seen there's outsourcing that can be a lot of stuff. There's technology in lots of different areas of the company. Have you helped other companies with their outsourcing needs?
Yeah, for sure. We've worked with clients from startups that are early stage, later stage, but we also have worked with large enterprise, billion-dollar companies, and so in those cases, we're working with like a department, and so in a case like that, that could be where their team is fully allocated, and now what they need is another piece of a feature or an area, and so what should be outsourced? My recommendation is pretty much anything that can be in a lot of cases. Again, that's I'm on this side of the equation. But what I think of is if you don't have a team that's already an expert in that space, then outsourcing probably makes a lot of sense. Whether that's a key feature or whether that's helping you to do maintenance, whether that's a department that needs it or some like startup that where it's their entire team. Again, it's a life cycle, and it also depends on who you have expertise in. Do you have the CTO? Then great. Then that could be an example you talked about where you already have a team, and then you just need to augment the team. But in some cases, if you don't have the budget for a CTO and you're really in validation, it might not really make a lot of sense to bring that person on. So you could really do almost everything. Again, not every partner can do that, but if you find a good, strong strategic partner like ours, we can help you do that from the start. So what should be? I think it's pretty flexible. It's really about comfort as well. Some teams we've known that I've worked with, we've worked on some deep IP, and we have full protection, and so that way, everybody who works with us can feel completely safe about whatever IP that they have. And at the same time, sometimes they want certain teams focusing on certain parts that they feel more concerned about, and that's totally fine. Some of it is also we've worked with financial institutions where they need to have people onshore. Sometimes our team members will go to the US to work with clients that are onshore, or in other cases, their own teams will do that, and then we'll work on the other pieces that are less security concerning. So again, I think a lot of it is more about comfort level and knowing maybe also what is less time sensitive. If you need something that's, hey, I need to be able to respond to my client in under an hour, that could be also another consideration.
Yep. No, that's great. And you had started earlier. You had said I think you had worked at Mercedes-Benz or some project with them or something like that, right? Is it Mercedes-Benz or BMW or?
Yeah, I've worked previously at the other agency, so we did do some other work with another multinational.
But in that case, you're not outsourcing the building of the car. It was probably some project that was related to some other tech in that company, right?
Yeah, for sure. That would be so. Maybe an example would be with Logitech. Logitech wanted one of their departments was having a hard time getting some of their work done, and so we started building out some of the applications for some of their audio equipment. And so that could be a space where you want to be able to build different applications out that, say, the marketing team needed support on, and so we were working with that department.
So you had mentioned you're running on EOS, which was interesting. A lot of small businesses in the United States run on EOS. A lot of the small businesses don't consider themselves tech companies, but there's probably lots of opportunities within those small businesses to introduce technology to help them, whether they're an HVAC company and they're managing a fleet of trucks to whatever that company is, right? So they probably don't have in-house software developers. It's a great opportunity to reach out to you and say, look, this is a business problem I have. Is there a software solution to automate that business problem? I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I gave throughout the HVAC example, but any other small business examples you could think of?
Yeah, for sure. We just had a client connect with us. They were in LASIK, so in eye surgery. And so they were using a large proprietary system, but they wanted to be able to connect to some other third-party tools. So they were looking for a way to connect to QuickBooks and to be able to then automate certain aspects of their finances out. And so what we did is we came in to help them connect those tools, and ultimately we're looking at maybe expanding that into a space where it can then be almost a marketplace, where it could be a connector between this proprietary system to many other tools that are often used in that space, in the small business space, even beyond, because QuickBooks is everywhere, or it could be Xero or any other finance tool. So there is a lot of spaces. So we have done some of that, and there's certainly a lot of businesses that could save a lot of money if they could automate some of those things, the procedures that they need to do between sending information between one system to another, and they have a person doing this or entering something into a database. So there's a lot of manual work out there that certainly could be automated and facilitated by a team like ours, for sure.
Yeah. Actually, I think Christophe, you should have a sales campaign just going after companies that are running on EOS and say, hey, we run on EOS. Like I'm actually aware of a company running on EOS. They had a fishbowl ERP system to manage their warehousing, and they had some bottlenecks associated with that, and they were using Google Sheets, and it wasn't tied together. Be a perfect opportunity for CodeEngine to come in there and help them out. Whether you're a large multinational like Logitech or you're a small business running on the EOS, tremendous value in working with offshore. Probably even more value from a small business perspective. So founders that are listening in right now, what's one of the key insights you'd recommend that they take away from this webinar right now?
I feel as though I think that when you're a startup especially, I know that finances is a major constraint, but to prioritize that, like you might hear, like, oh, when we're having like an RFP, like, oh, we're just looking for the lowest budget number to take on the project. I think that's just something to really be wary of, is just making sure you're finding a team that really fits your values. And you really have to consider that this software needs to be viewed as it's truly mission critical. If you had something that was mission critical, like you're flying a space shuttle up to space, you wouldn't choose the lowest, cheapest vendor. You really would make sure this is a team that knows what they're doing and that they're experts in it. And so I think this is one of those things, is be very vigilant about what you're looking for in a partner and what you're asking of them. And I think part of that, there's a cost that comes from you to do a good interview process. So any company who's interviewed people, they know, they've had great people they've hired, but they've also probably hired some people who just didn't really work out. And so it's just about looking at that process of how are you recruiting and your partner, how are you working with that partner, but also spending the time to make sure you're doing your due diligence to make sure they are the right fit. So not just looking at the cheapest bid, but looking at their expertise, experience, track record, cultural fit, how they think, and really just thinking about like not the short term, but really looking at the total cost of ownership, the TCO of like, if you choose a partner that's low, are you really going to be paying for it in the end?
Yep, and I've been burned by that as well. So you're absolutely right. So we had a few questions come in. Thierry, who's been moderating, relayed those questions. So one was, how has AI been impacting outsourced software? I've been hearing, oh, AI can do everything now. Like I'll just use AI. Can you just comment on that, Christophe?
Yeah, actually, I totally should have brought that up earlier on. Like one of the things that helps teams become more efficient is just AI. I mean, I think everyone here has become fairly familiar with ChatGPT. And I think everyone also recognizes that ChatGPT is pretty amazing. It can do a lot of things, and it can really help us do our work much more quickly. But I think everyone who's played with ChatGPT long enough also recognizes it's not yet able to take over your job. There's a lot that we do. There's a lot that we need to understand about our businesses. And it's kind of the same thing with software. Software development has been deeply impacted by AI. And we use AI a lot, and our team members use it. But what that does is help us to be more efficient. It means what we're doing is we're developing much more quickly, especially for the basic things. But at the end of the day, um, there's just so much you need to understand about building software and business. It's really understanding the business and the deeper levels of what is going on and why it's doing it, uh, that currently AI isn't really able to do. There's a lot of nuances. And so having a team that really understands your business and software allows it to take advantage of AI, but also catch all of its hallucinations and false positives and negatives that it's throwing into the code.
Yeah. I've seen AI certainly accelerate development, but absolutely not replace it. So I'm completely in alignment with you. I've seen some of the code AI generates, and it's like there was no way this would pass muster, to roll into production. But it can help really accelerate a developer. Maybe one day, maybe in the next few years it will, but still, I think you're still going to need that human in the middle to translate the human requirements. That picture that was earlier on with all the different, outcomes, it's really, you want that human to understand what the requirements are. And that's been my personal experience. So next question that came in, Thierry relayed, as a startup, they're a budget-friendly startup. So how do you go about estimating, Christophe, in that process?
Yeah, so often what we'll do, not only for budget conscious startups, I would say for almost any startup where they don't have a full understanding of what they're delivering, what we like to start with is we like to do like an initial period where we'll do I'm forgetting this word, essentially where we'll do an analysis with them, and we'll really review what it is, the business objectives. So if they've done all the work and they really have a well-defined RFP, that's great, but a lot of companies don't. They have a lot of theoretical ideas. And so some teams who might want a full estimation, what we'll say is we'll give you the ballpark based upon what you've indicated. But our recommendation is to do a little bit more exercise with people who really understand it, and we're happy to do that. And so what we'll do is we'll do a consultation, and that consultation will help you to ultimately deliver on a much more defined project scope and what really should be in your MVP and how you want to phase it out. And so by doing that, that allows us to have a much clearer definition of what needs to be estimated on. And so with that consultation, ultimately with the takeaway, if a team feels as though we're not the right fit, they can always take that and then work with any other development team they would like as well. So that's often what we'll do. We can certainly work on the ballpark with the team, and we'll be able to go from there and just estimate. But we recommend doing that consultation because it really just helps teams be more assured around what they're getting.
Right. So consultation, critically important as part of that first step. And if there's any takeaway from here, it's when you're working with outsourced companies, it's all about communication and making sure you have cultural fit, communication, etc. So the final question that Thierry's relaying here is, so what sort of involvement is the expectation on behalf of the end user here? What or the client? What's their involvement in this process?
Yeah, for sure. So this is speaking a little bit to one of the ideas I talked about. The idea is you kind of get what you put into any relationship in a lot of ways, and so if you think you can just throw something over the fence and it's that magic black box, it rarely works. Just the same way AI can't take over software development, because you still need to understand so many things. So the closer you can work with the team, the closer you can communicate efficiently, the better you are. Actually, that makes me think, can we bring up that last slide of the presentation? It shows a little bit of the cultural view. don't know if we can bring up that slide.
So Thierry, can you bring it up? Or I can. I did it. Okay.
Yeah. So like this is something that we do here. So this is the culture map, and this comes from a book that talks about just these different dynamics of different cultures of how we like to partner and work or even communicate together. And so this is something that we do. And so by understanding where we are on spectrums of how we like to communicate, how we like to work together, or how people like to, are you low context or are you high context? Do people work in more in an egalitarian culture or hierarchical? Are we task-based or are we relational? And so these are things that we work through to be able to best understand and teach our team so they can understand. It might be a little bit hard to see here, but in a lot of the cases, Vietnam tends to be, and say India, tend to be much more on the left-hand side, whereas North America, US, Canadian, tend to be a lot more towards center left in a lot of these dynamics. And so this is something that we do with our team members to help them to better explore and understand. This is something we also work with our clients with so that they understand these are the dynamics that we're working with. And since most of our clients are North American, we really work a lot with our team towards moving them towards understanding the North American style of delivery, expectations, communication, and what it ultimately looks like as you do these things. What does partnership look like? And so kind of getting back to your question, so for us, the involvement is there's these parts where we have to view each other as a partner. And as we understand these different dynamics, we can understand how we can effectively bridge those barriers and those gaps. So that way we're really always on the same page. So there is a part of anybody who ultimately wants to work with anybody, let alone wherever you are, there's always miscommunication gaps. There's places where you need to work together. And so we do our part to make sure we minimize that as much as possible. But it always takes two people to tango, if you will. It takes another party to be an effective communicator to make sure everybody's on the same page and expectations are aligned.
Yeah, and certainly depending upon the scope of the project, it varies. I'm sure you've had quick projects that are about a month long or something like that. But also in my experience, if you're working multi-months, even multiple years, team becomes part of the family. I know I've traveled internationally, met with family members, had dinner at their house, was an honored guest. I mean, it's truly like they're part of the team. And that's, I think, critically important to understand to have a successful outsourcing partnership. I'm sure, Christophe, you've been to many dinners with your clients, maybe met their family, et cetera, right?
Yeah, definitely. So we work with our clients usually multi-year. So 6 months is usually where it's the shorter length, but yeah, years at a time. And so yeah, we have a very deep relationship with our partners. We stay with them through thick and thin. There's times they have challenges, but we view ourselves as a partner. So that means, yeah, we'll take risks with them. We'll work through the challenges, and so yeah, we have a very deep and close relationship. Over coffee, tea, meals, and just life on life. As a startup, you understand the challenges that you get going through, and so we like to be there all along the way.
Excellent. All right. Well, anything else you want to cover, Christophe, as we bring this down?
I think that covers most of it. So it's just been a pleasure to be able to talk about these concepts, and just look forward to hopefully teams really getting the concept of just the need to find the right value partner versus just the cost-effective one that really helps you to succeed. That's what we like to do. We really just like seeing things where it's a huge win.
Excellent. All right, great. All right, well, for those who have attended, if you've enjoyed this webinar, we have 2 more webinars coming up, one in March and one in April. And there'll be a link after this webinar is done for you to provide feedback. So we'd love to hear what you thought was of value to you and how we can customize the future webinars all around outsourced development. So Christophe, thank you very much for your time today. I know it's late night, early morning for you over in Vietnam. But it's been a pleasure talking with you, Christophe, today, and look forward to talking to you again next month then.
All right. Thanks, Brad.
All right, great. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.